please, he will be start recording and then he will be muting and then you start introducing.
Yes,
Dubey sir, you can start now. Unmute yourself. Dubey sir, unmute yourself.
and we can begin now. Yeah. Okay, so let me wish everyone a very happy 2021. This is our first talk of the new year. And our speaker is Mr. S.P.Kandaswamy, as you already know him. I'll briefly say something about him. Mr. Kandaswamy came across Krishnaji's teachings by chance in 1974 as he was preparing for his chartered accountancy exams. Becoming interested in the teachings, he attended most of the talks Krishnaji had in Chennai till 1986 when he passed away. Getting involved with the activities of the foundation, especially KFI as a volunteer, he went on to become his trustee in 1993, and he is working as secretary of the Krishnamurti Foundation India from 2000. This involves overseeing the various activities of the Krishnamurti Foundation India, its schools and study centers, and also keeping in touch with the other sister foundations in US, UK, and Spain. Mr. Kandaswamy is going to talk about different way of living. So with these words, I'll request Mr. Kandaswamy to please begin his talk. And after the talk is over, if Harshji perhaps can sum up and give an observation for about 10-15 minutes. And then the floor will be open for question and answer session. So Mr. Kandaswamy, sir. Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute. Yeah.
Thank you, Dubey for your kind words. Well, many of us have had the opportunity to listen to Krishnaji both in person or through the videos. Many beautiful expressions Krishnaji has used, very telling expressions Krishnaji has used. And generally, first impression we have is these expressions, these words strike us very deeply. For many of us, the common refrain or the common question that comes up is, yes, we have heard him, but it's rather difficult to reflect those that he pointed out in our daily life. I have come across many of my friends, many of my fellow travelers saying this. It sort of slips through the fingers. The teachings slip through the fingers. You do understand, but still you don't understand. This has been a common refrain I've come across. Now, when we say Krishnaji's teachings, I think we mean the collective body of the insights he came upon through his keen sense of observation, right? Of people, of nature, of things. He had a very, very keen sense of observation, and out of that, he came upon, out of that, he saw something which we are unable to see, and that's something we call as insights he had. So when we say teachings, it's nothing but the body of these insights he came upon, which he attempted to share with us for many, many years throughout his life. Now, there's so many things that we can talk about, but I'm going to take a few aspects of those insights, right? He also posed us a great challenge saying, sir, it is not good enough just to listen to my words and it becomes mere theory, right? Can you really live the teachings? Live the teachings in the sense, be in contact with those insights, reflect those insights in your daily life. That's what the question he posed to all of us. It's a challenge that posed to all of us. Now, when we all observe our own lives, we could see a certain patterns, right? Certain common strands in all our lives, certain common patterns in all our lives. And living the teachings of Krishnaji, or to answer a question, can I live differently? Or is it possible to have a different way of living? Involves fundamental changes or ending of those patterns. Now, let us see what these patterns or vicious loops in which we are caught ourselves are. One, of course, is fairly a familiar ground, which many of us are aware, because we have heard him many times. He says most of the time, if not all the time, our responses to challenges of life, to events of life, is from a state influenced by the past. And he called it, as we are aware, a conditioned state. There is nothing afresh from which we give our responses to the immediate flow of life. We have gathered in our mind so many past memories, past responses, past conclusions, past views. And out of that, we meet the immediate present. Right? We are fairly aware of this, and we could see that this is a fact in almost all our lives. And most of the time, that's how we respond. But we hardly notice the implications of being in such a state, namely, our grasp of the life's challenges, life situations is rather distorted. We are unable to see things as they are actually. There is a certain distortion. There is a certain difficulty in seeing things actually comprehensively as they are. Right? Consequently, our responses are in a mismatch with the challenges that we face. Our response to those challenges are in a mismatch or in misstep with the challenges we face. So our responses become very mechanical, habitual. With the result, the challenges are not met. And our vision itself is restricted because we are looking at things from a very conditioned state. Our vision itself is very restricted. We are not able to see the full comprehensive picture. We see what we want to see with a distortion. Now, it's a common experience of all of us that we are in that state. So the first thing that strikes me is when we talk about a wholly different way of living, there has to be a break out of this pattern. Can we see things as they are, fully, not from our past, from the immediate present, suspending our conclusions, beliefs, views, if not dissolving them altogether, which perhaps is quite difficult for most of us. At least suspending them, freezing them for some time, have a mind that is open, fresh to look at things new. And out of that, can we respond to life challenges, events? So this will be the first strand of a different way of living to me. The next one, I would say, is something which is fundamental to all our lives, about which Krishnaji has talked at length a great deal. The sense of fear we have in our lives, right? Now, we are generally prone to imagine, because we come into contact with Krishnaji's words, Krishnaji's teachings, we understand all that he has talked about, we are really free of fear. Yes, he said, be free of fear, then life is very different. We just listen to that statement, it is a beautiful, terse statement. We imagine, there is a danger that we imagine that we are already free of fear. But I would question it, because fear is one of the most fundamental aspects of human life. And unless we come to terms with it, resolve it, end it, it will be like a shadow in our lives, right? It will affect many of the things that we live, many of the states of consciousness we go through. It will have a fundamental and lasting impact on our lives. To say that I have listened to Krishnamurti, I understand all that he is pointing out, I am not free of fear, may be an illusion. We have to be very careful here, because it's like a shadow following us. And we have to see really not the examples of fears, but the root of fear, as Krishnaji pointed out. Now, Krishnaji pointed out the root of fear is thought and thinking, and which is anchored in psychological time. Many of us are aware of the difference between physical time and psychological time. We understand the relevance and the actuality of physical time. But for us to understand the structure of psychological time is somewhat difficult. When you live in psychological time, where thought moves continuously, and that thinking and thought creates fears. I used to give one example. For the benefit of some of you who have not attended some of my earlier talks, let me repeat through a very simple example. I go to a garden today evening, and while walking, I come across a snake, a cobra. It's an actual fact. There is a cobra standing very close to me, lying very close to me. I see it. There is an immediate bodily intelligence to step out from that scene or speed away from that place, walk away quickly or run away quickly. That's a body intelligence response. Instant. There is no thinking there. There is no fear there. There is a seeing of some danger, seeing of a fact, recognition of the danger, and the immediate stepping away. There is no interval of thought where you stand there, intellectually analyze, it's a cobra, how poisonous it is, what happens when it bites, what happens when you die. All those things doesn't take place, do not take place there. There's an immediate, instant bodily response, no fear. There is an action, no thinking, but there is an action. So moving away. Now I come back home, and the next day evening, I again go back to the same gardens. The cobra which was there the previous day is not at all there now. But I begin to think of the yesterday, what happened. I begin to think, start thinking, yesterday there was a cobra, it might be there too, here also, today also. I have to be very careful. So that is the first wave of fear that comes up. The fact is different, there was no basis for fear. But thinking about, being in a psychological time, thinking about what happened the previous day, yesterday, from that comes the fear. So in a way, Krishnaji pointed out that fear, thought, and psychological time are the same root, or in a way, same. They indicate the one and the same thing. They are different expressions, but they are one and the same thing. So if we ask the question a different way of living, we have to understand this and see whether our ability to move out of psychological time, which is a challenging thing to do. It's not easy. It's easy to say, but it is one of the toughest challenges. To be free of the psychological time, be free of the consequent thinking that takes place in psychological time, and to see the actual facts and move from fact to fact is something which we have to ask ourselves, are we up to it? You may think it is easy, but I think it's tough. But it doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's one of the greatest things to do. And one has to have the energy to go right up to it. The third thing that comes up before us while we ask a question, can we live differently, is the question, can we live our daily life free of conflicts? Which again, like fear, is a shadow in our life. Obtain numbers of conflicts from morning to night, conflict with the fellow person, conflict with the neighbor, conflict with the family member, conflict with the values we have and with the values others have, or conflict with the identity I have with the identity another one has. There are 100 different types of conflict. Now, the modern world always says there are various ways, various heterogeneous people, diverse groups. There may be diversity, but there has to be unity out of the diversity. Take, for example, the Hindu-Muslim enmity that is sometimes promoted or sometimes comes up in our country or all over the world. Hindu versus Muslim, or Muslim versus Christian, or Christian versus Hindu, conflict between different religions, different ideologies. Now, over centuries, the world has assumed that these differences in identities, conflicts are bound to be there, but still there can be unity, peace amongst them. This has been a thinking of past so many centuries. But we know where we are at the end of this thinking. The conflicts continue, the consequent violence, the terrorism, the killing of people, so much of suffering, it continues. So here where Krishnaji comes in and then fundamentally points out when there are two, it is bound to be conflict. It is invariable and natural law. Instead of there is only one, namely one, there is only one religion of humanity. There is no Hindu, there is no Christian, there is no Muslim within the whole field of humanity. That is an artificial creation. And if you have this artificial creation, it is inevitable because it is not unitary, fragmented, split. In that split, fragmented situation, conflict is inevitable. You do what you want to do, you can't sort this out. Now, when we look back and see what is happening in the world, we could see it so obviously, right? So the question arises, how do we end all these religions? How can we wish that Christianity will go from the human scene, Hinduism will go from the human scene, Muslim will go from the human scene? How is it possible? Yes, it's quite impossible. I don't think we can wish that away. But the challenge we face is inwardly, within each one of us, can we dissolve these divisions? Can I start looking at the other not in terms of the prism of Hindu versus Muslim or Christian versus Hindu or Hindu versus Muslim, but just as another human being? Can I, you and I, we can't end these divisions of religions in the world. It is impossible. They have been there for the last thousands of years. To think that they should all end and only one religion of humanity is going to be here, it's a dream world, utopia. They are bound to be like this. But can, as individuals like you and I, free ourselves from that division? Just look upon another person as a human being and relate to that person as a human being, not through the religious label or identity. I think a different way of living qualitatively means freeing ourselves from all these divisions, from all these conflicts, which inwardly we seem to have because of these divisions, and relate to other people without these conflicts and identities. Right? The next thing that comes to my mind is relationships. No, we all are aware, and Krishnaji also has said many times, that life is a garland of relationships, a continuous garland of relationships which we seem to form from the time we are born till we end up in the grave. You are born, you have a relationship with your mother, that's perhaps the closest relationship, then with the father, then with your siblings. You grow up, then you go to the school with your friends in the school, then you go to the college, friends in the college, then acquire a degree, go to your workplace, relationship with the colleagues, then you get married, then becomes probably one of the closest relationship with another human being, husband and wife, or wife and husband. Then you have children, then we have a relationship as a father, then a little later on as a grandfather, and then a little later the life ebbs away. So life is nothing but a series of relationships. Now, some of us are aware that if you are honest, however close these relationships are, like for example, a relationship that we have as husband and wife, or a wife and a husband, are close lovers, a boy and a girl. Except for the romantic part of it, sometimes we may imagine. The actual fact is there is not much of a depth, richness, a very serious sense of great care, affection, depth, richness to these relationships. Even if it is a very close relationship like a husband and wife. If we are honest, if we are able to look at our own relationships that we have with our closest people, husband, wife, or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, that sense of deep intimacy, close contact, deep intimacy, rich quality and depth, that beauty, most of the time seems to be lacking. And that we could understand, why is it lacking? Why is it not there, despite the romantic part of it? It is perhaps not there because that relationship is never direct. I form a certain cluster of opinions, which Krishnaji used the expression to denote that cluster as image. I form an image about my wife, and similarly, she forms an image about me. And most of the time, we relate between these, the relationship takes place between these two images, which constantly keeps moving. But the relationship is always between these two images. It is never direct, free of the images. That is the reason as to why there is not much of a depth, rich quality and beauty in however close or intimate the relationships are. So naturally, when we talk about a different quality of living, a wholly different way of living, we have to come to terms with the actual fact honestly and see whether it is possible to relate to another human being, whether he is close or not so close, without this image. Now, how does one relate without this image? That's again a big challenge. Now, one can see one thing very clearly. As far as I have a self-image about myself, it is inevitable that I will have images about others, because self-image is nothing but a summation of all the images I have. Image about X, image about Y, image about Z, image about this politician, image about this religious leader, hundreds of images. The cluster, the summation of all these images is what I have within me as a self-image. Liking this, not liking that, preferring this, not preferring that, opposing this, agreeing with this. So the fundamental challenge before all of us is it possible to live my daily life without a single self-image about me, and consequently without images about others? Now, I have listened to Krishnaji and he has talked about it, and I may imagine that I am already doing it, or it's very easy to do it. I think we need to be a little cautious here. To live without a single self-image is one of the most difficult challenges that we face in the teachings, right? You may imagine, but actual reality may not be, right? We generally have a tremendous fear, and we generally feel, oh, how is it possible to live in this world? We'll be just pushed around. You'll be swept under the carpet without your sense of your own identity, without your sense of self-image and consequently image about others. How can you live your daily life in this world? You will be just pushed around. You will be nowhere. You will be so vulnerable. That is the sense we all have, right? But we have to examine whether it is, yes, it is difficult and challenging, whether it is impossible. Krishnaji said it is not impossible. It is possible to live sanely, happily without the self-image. He may have said this in words, but for us, it's just words. We have to ask ourselves this question: are we really living that way, or are we caught in these images? Right? It is not image amongst people, that image I have about wife, about a husband or a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It is image about everything, even about my relationship with money, my relationship with properties, my relationship with nature. So when I use the expression relationship, I indicate the entire gamut of relationships, relations to people, to nature, to property, to money. I think it's very important for us to re-examine the nature of this relationship with all these things and see what comes in the way of this rich quality in these relationships. So to ask the question, is it possible to live differently, means to ask this question, whether it is possible to be free of these images and consequently relate to another. The next thing that comes to my mind is the sense of creativity or the mechanical nature of our responses in life. When we look at the daily fabric of our life, the daily canvas of our life, the nature of our life, we could see it's caught in a certain pattern, right? We live the same way mechanically, right? It's like eating a very fixed menu day after day, day after day. If you are a South Indian, the fixed menu is idli, sambar, chutney, dosa. If you are a North Indian, channa, puri, chapati, go after day after day, day after day. It's a set pattern. We get used to it. Similarly, like a physical food menu, we also have an inward menu within our mind, within our skull, within our consciousness. That menu is our preferences, likes, dislikes, images, identities, ambitions, frustrations. So we revolve, our inner life revolves around this fixed menu day after day, day after day, with mechanically responding to all this same pattern. The menu is fixed within the same pattern. Our responses are also fixed within the same pattern. That is nothing fresh, original, as creative, non-mechanical. If we are honest and we observe our lives, if we are honest, we would acknowledge it is so. We can't pretend it is not so. We have to acknowledge that most of the time, except for some intermittent brief periods, we are caught in an inward pattern, and our responses to things, to life flow is also within a very fixed pattern. That's nothing new, nothing creative in that. So we have to break out of this patterned living if we want to answer the question, is it possible to have a different way of living? Now, these are the areas we lay the brickwork, we lay the foundation. Because generally, one of the mistakes we commit, especially people who have listened to Krishnaji commit, I have observed many times, I have come across many times, I have also committed this error. Even now, perhaps I commit once in a while, but not so frequently as I used to do it before. Because Krishnaji used beautiful expressions, being in contact with the sacred, the perfume of the other, right? Something mystical words he used, mystical states of consciousness he used, right? The benediction is here and now, right? There are so many beautiful, profound, mystical expressions he used, and those words get lodged in our mind. And what is creation, right? These are all very profound, fundamental questions he asked. Now, before the mistake we commit, I have found, is without laying the foundation in our daily life, by clearing up the debris, the cobweb in these areas, namely the state of conditioned state, wrestling with all the time fear and psychological time, wrestling with conflicts, wrestling through images with relationships. Without clearing the ground in these crucial areas in our daily life, we tend to ask big questions. How do I come upon the sacred? Is there creation? What is the mystery of this creation? What is the mystery of birth? What is the mystery of death? And we have to understand we can't find answers to any of these questions unless we lay the right foundation in critical areas in our life, in our daily life, lay the foundation, as Krishnaji used to say, put our house in order first. Unless we do that, it's rather presumptuous, rather speculative for us to ask these big questions like what is creation, what is benediction, what is sacred, is there a movement of different kind of energy in life? These questions are of course important, but our simply asking these questions without putting order in our daily life is just being very speculative. It's a dead end. You can go on answering any number of times, that answers will be as limited as the questions we ask. Perhaps one of the reasons as to why we do this is we use the intellect most often and not come upon the insight. No, as human beings, we are endowed with many senses, and one of that perhaps is intellect, ability to reason, ability to comprehend, logically argue, analyze. This is intellect. But we do have, nature has endowed with other senses, sense of seeing, sense of listening, sense of smelling, sense of being in contact with something, right? What happens generally, the way we have lived, or the modern life, it is more so, is our intellect gets nurtured, bloated. Our other senses get diminished. We have never nurtured our other senses, ability to see, watch, listen, smell. They are under restricted optimum, less than optimum usage or nurturing. Whereas intellect all the time is in center stage, right? One of the difficulties as to why we say, I find the teaching simple in one way, but very difficult in the same breath. Many of people say, in one sense, the teachings are very simple because nothing esoteric about it. It's not like a rocket science. After all, the teachings cover my daily life. In that sense, it is simple, but somehow I can't hold it. It slips through my fingers. It's also parallelly, it is difficult. One of the fundamental reasons as to why most of us feel so about these teachings is The teacher spoke out of insight. For him, when he spoke about these things, it was reality. Whereas we have always received it through our intellect, as idea, as word, as theory. So there is a fundamental mismatch between the state out of which he spoke and the state out of which I received it. This mismatch makes me say, oh, it is very difficult. In one sense, the teachings are simple. In another sense, the teachings are difficult. So I have to understand, is there a way of listening to what is being pointed out? Or is there a way of seeing what is pointed out without the interference of the word or the intellect or as a theory? Direct seeing out of insight. Can I see it as an insight? Now, Krishnaji says, as far as thought is in movement within you, is in operation within you. I mean, not functional thought, psychological thought as you and me with identities, preferences, likes and dislikes, self-images, etc. As far as this movement is going on in your mind, it is an obstruction to insight. Insight will not take place. You won't be able to see things clearly. That means if thought, psychological thought is in operation, we are preempting the possibility of an insight. Now, unless insight takes place, you can't have an actual comprehension of what is being pointed out, the truth of it, and consequently full understanding of it. There will always be this mismatch. There is always this distortion in following, seeing, listening, comprehending. That is why we say the teachings are difficult. Not only of Krishnaji or any other master's teachings. We say this. Now, consequently, it is important to understand that there has to be an equilibrium between intellect and all our other senses. Just as we have nurtured our intellect, we have to nurture our other senses also. And when they are in the same state of optimum nurturing, all the senses in a perfect equilibrium, then insight is possible. Then you can come upon a different state of consciousness. I am reminded of a very beautiful Tamil saying. It's a Tamil verse. Many of you perhaps may not know it. Some of you who are familiar with Tamil must have known it. There is a very ancient, 5,000 years old text called Thirumandiram. In Tamil, we call it Thirumandiram. It has about 3,300 four-line verses in Tamil, ancient Tamil. It was sung by a Siddhar called Thirumular. It's a very famous one. It has been translated in English and other languages. It's called the text of Thirumandiram. And it covers the whole field. It's supposed to be one of the most ancient texts in Tamil. Tamil is a very rich language, very ancient language. They say, the historians say, this is one of the most ancient texts of Tamil. And 3,300 verses, it covers the whole range of life. Like Krishnaji's teachings cover the whole of life. This text covers the whole of life and living. One of the verses comes to my mind. I will first say it in Tamil and then I give an English translation of it. I quote, Parpan agathile parpasu aindundu Meiparum indri verithu thirivuna Meiparum undagi veriyum adanginal Parpan pasu aindum palai churime. Unquote. Now, on the surface of it, the English translation runs like this. On the surface of it, right? First impression, you get a misleading impression. On the surface of it, the literal translation of this is like this in English. There are 5 cows in a Brahmin's house. They are running here and there, running skelter here and there, because there is no anchoring of a person, common anchoring. When the common anchoring takes place, all these 5 cows give beautiful quantities of milk, abundant qualities of milk. This is a literal surface meaning. But the actual meaning is these 5 cows refers to the 5 senses we have, right? And when they are not in harmony with each other, they are pulling apart from different directions with the conflicts, with the wastage of energy, all that we are familiar with. There is an imbalance amongst these senses. The intellect is bloated, the other senses are less nurtured, not in the same step or same intensity, then this mismatch creates pulling away a part of all these senses from one to another, conflicts, wastage of energy, fear, violence, all that goes on, right? But when this dichotomy or this sense of imbalance ends, there is a harmony that comes in when these five senses are anchored in a common intensity. Then you have a very different state of consciousness. Yield abundant qualities of milk means you are in a very different state of consciousness, human consciousness. So it's extraordinary. Like this, we can go on quoting many beautiful verses of Tirumandira. So I think we need to remember this, that most of the time we have nurtured, given too much importance. We have put the center stage, we have put the intellect in the center stage, crowned the intellect and put it on the mantle and pushed aside all our other senses. They have in a withered state, not really nurtured as we have nurtured the intellect. We have to correct the imbalance. It's a very, in fact, I always feel when we listen to Krishnaji and ask ourselves the question, where do I start? Okay, I understand Krishnaji all the time talking about where do I begin? I am in a mess. Where do I begin? I feel this is where we start. To see that we are giving too much importance to intellect, the word, the theory, and we have ignored and not nurtured adequately the other senses. We have to set right this imbalance. That is one of the most crucial starting points. Finally, I come upon another state. If we have laid down, if we have asked ourselves these important questions, cleared the ground, laid down the foundation of our daily life, being free of a conditioned state, coming to terms with the fear, understanding the structure and the root of fear, how it is connected to thinking and time, psychological time, and asking ourselves the question, is it possible to have a relationship free of images? If not so, why not so? And talking about our life in terms of creativity and mechanical responses caught in a pattern, and seeing the difference between the intellect and the insight, and how our life is not enriched by mere intellect. Something different has to take place. If we have asked ourselves all these questions in these areas, laid the foundation brick by brick, right, coherently, out of clarity, out of clear seeing, then perhaps we may, if we are really serious, ask of the question, is there sacred? Is there something sacred? Now, if you look at the modern world, people around us, there seems to be an absolute insensitivity to something very profound. We are caught all the time in mundane and profane, right? Just live a very superficial life. Though many times great seers like Krishnaji and others have pointed out, to take birth in the form of a life in this earth itself is extraordinarily gifted. And more so when you are taking birth as a human being, endowed with something more special than the other life forms. To be born as a human being is an extraordinarily beautiful world. It itself is a great blessing, and we are wasting that opportunity. Many seers have pointed this out. We are like a blind man, right? Just walking around without seeing the beauty of the earth and the beautiful colors of the earth. We may have physical eyes, but we are actually like a blind person. That is what people like Krishnaji and sages have pointed out. Now, that is what we also see. It hardly comes upon in our mind to ask certain profound questions. What is the mystery of all this? Is there something sacred, or we are caught all the time within the travails of thought, right? Imprisoned by thought, right from the birth to death. Is it that I get imprisoned by thought without breaking through it? Is there something of a different quality of energy which one comes into contact? Krishnaji used the expression, many other seers use traditional expressions. Krishnaji used an expression, is something beyond thought which is sacred. He said, it is the other. Something, a different quality of energy, not the energy of thought. And he did say, there is a different quality of energy which is the source of all creation. Now, we can speculate on this, right? In fact, this is a big question we ask. Is there something sacred? How does one come upon this sacred? Many of us have perhaps asked this question without finding answers. Now, this is something to do with silence, right? I remember when somebody asked Krishnaji this question, and Krishnaji hardly answers these type of questions. How? Because how means a technique, a method. He says, sorry, sir, that is a wrong question. But once I remember, Krishnaji almost came very close to answering this question. He said, I don't know whether I have said it earlier, but let me repeat it. He said, sir, if you are asking these questions in a serious way, let me see whether I can attempt to answer this question. Yes, there is something as sacred. There is sacred. And one can come upon this provided there are two prerequisites met. One, there should not be a shadow of self-centered activity. Shadow, we use the expression shadow of self-centered activity in daily life. And two, there should be a sense of absolute silence in the brain. If these two are met, perhaps one may come upon the sense of sacred. This is what I remember he answered. Now, I see that the silence he is talking about in the brain is the absence of noise. Right? It is not the silence that comes out of the noise is absent. He is talking about a silence of all silences, the mother of all silences, which perhaps that's something which takes place when the me has ended. The noise of the me, the noise of the self has ended. Naturally, without control, without suppression, right? The noise of the self and the thought underlying the self has seen the futility of its movement, has come to a natural resting point, quiet. And that is the state, which is a state of silences of all silences, not merely the absence of noise. So that is the type of silence he is talking about, silence when he says silence in the brain. Now we have to hold all this in our mind. It may be difficult for us to comprehend it. We may say, well, Krishnaji has pointed this out, but I am nowhere near it. We need not beat our breast, become cynical, bitter, frustrated. Yes, it is something which is not a reality for us. Without living a shadow of self-centered activity is not a reality for us, if we are very honest. Absolute silence in the brain is not all a reality for us, if we are honest. But we don't need to be frustrated. We don't need to be bitter, cynical. What is this? I have listened to Krishnaji 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, hundreds of times I have attended his talks, but I am nowhere near what he is pointing out. No, I think that type of approach will rather waste our energies. We need to hold that question, however impossible, non-real it looks like us now at the moment. We'll have to still hold it as a possibility and continue our journey of life. This is what I have felt. So when we ask about whether it is possible to live differently, or can we come upon a different quality of living, different way of living in life, I think we need to be aware of all these aspects, because it is not in vacuum we ask this question and answer the question. It is in terms of concrete things, like how do we respond, from what state of mind do we respond? Is it a conditioned state or a free of a conditioned state? Have we come to terms or resolved the deep root of fear within us? If we have not done that, any amount of imagination will not lead us anywhere. Have I resolved my conflicts in my daily life? What is the quality and nature of my relationships? Am I creative or caught in a mechanical pattern? And do I nurture all the time the intellect? The result, I have a bloated intellect, neglecting all my senses, consequently leading to an imbalance and the distortion that the imbalance creates. If we have done all this homework, which means if I have lived differently in all these areas, then perhaps we are in a state to ask big questions. What is creation? What is the source of life? What is the source of creation? Is there something sacred? Is there a movement of sacred energy apart from the movement of thought? But to ask all these questions now, before we lay the foundation, is like putting the cart before the horse. And I'm sure many of us would hold all these aspects within our consciousness and continue our journey. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Very interesting. Harshji, would you like to say something, sir? Unmute yourself, unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, such a deep and profound talk. Thank you, Kandaswamy. This is, I mean, many things occur to one, but so I'll try and expand on a few things you might have said. You know, I think you said things and bring up further questions, because
Yes.
every time when you think of these questions, they always bring up further questions. So, see, I think for people who are probably the people in this discussion, the basic situation is this. We've listened to Krishnamurti, read him, whatever, and we have some understanding. Something, let me call it understanding, may have been insight as well. It may have been something, sometimes quite profound, which has affected us sufficiently so that it has changed the course of our lives, right? You yourself have joined the Krishnamurti Foundation instead of pursuing a career in business or whatever that you might have. I too have, you know, other people, Harshaji talks about the immediate the impact and how. So in some ways, our way of thinking has been affected already. We are, but at the same time, we are not in a position to say, yes, we've got it, or even that we are. We understand the depth of what he is saying, just that we have an inkling. And the question then is, the question, because you're talking about really a different way of living, which is what the title of this discussion is. So now what do we do? How do we live our lives so that we can move in a direction? Now, there's something important, I think, to add to what you've been saying about questions like, is there conflict in my life? Or do I have images in relationship? Because when we ask this kind of question, two things happen. One is we come to this, we may come to a tendency to come to, yes, I have images in my life. And from that, we want to move to, okay, so now how can I not have images in my life? So now I'm going to try and not have images in my life. But that is not a productive way of moving, I think. And certainly Krishnaji does not say that you try and strive to not have images in your life. It's more like, because there are other things he said. Firstly, it's very clear, as you made clear, that observation of this, becoming aware of movement, of image making, of thought, of fear, of all these things, that's absolutely necessary. So that's an immediate question for us, whether to be aware of all of this. Only we are free of fear. But then Krishnaji says an interesting thing. He says, observation is all you need. You don't then have to think about what to do when you see, as long as you're observing the process. So it may be that we shouldn't be asking ourselves, how can we now live without images, but just be observing the process of image making, which is continuous. And I may shed some images, I may recognize I have some images, but tomorrow I'll create another image of myself or of another person. Or then there is the situation where I may have let go of some of my images, but the other person wants me to have an image because they're comforted. I mean, children often, they have an image of father and mother and, you know, who are there. It helps them to feel safe and secure. So people project images onto you. So there is a whole complex process of image making that is going on in relationship. So I think that what is required and what Krishnaji is asking for is to be aware of the process, to be aware of moment to moment of the process of image making. Because already to be focusing on, am I making images about myself or am I free of images, is altogether too much focus on the self. I mean, what is this self that is making images or not making images? So I think he does also make this clear in some of his talks, that what this would mean then is that you are observing the process by which images arise and why images arise and whether they bring security, because one of the reasons that images arise is a desire for security. So what is this desire for security? And so this is a I think an important fact. In some ways, Krishnaji is, when he asks questions, is somewhat like a Zen master. These are questions without immediate answers, or they are questions to be answered by action. Like, the Zen famous example, Zen master saying, what is the sound of one hand clapping? So when you start to consider that, it throws your mind into a kind of tailspin, because what is meant? What could he mean by that? But I think Krishnaji is not just asking Zen-like questions. He is more like, how do you answer a question like, can that mountain be climbed? That's
Actually, your voice is breaking. Actually, your voice is breaking. No, your voice is not very clear.
I think the questions we have, there are questions to be answered. Many of the answers are
It's breaking. Lots of echo and
Some problem with the internet. Some problem with the internet. So we can take him afterwards whenever internet works. Let others ask question. Is it all right, sir?
yeah. I have a question, sir. In our daily life, there are moments when we are aware and one can watch things as they are, and that's how many superficial conditionings do drop down. But you talked about fear, and sometimes the cultural conditionings are so deep, and there are deeper layers. Even though when one is aware, it's very difficult to get out of that fear which is there. I remember Krishnaji addressing his teachers here in Rajghat and talking about fear. He said, sir, it's a very important emotion. You should talk about it every day. So my question is there any preparation needed for this kind of watching, or how does, I think perhaps how is the wrong question to ask, but do we need to prepare ourselves to come to that stage where one is able to really see those deeper layers and the disturbances that are create for us?
It's a question for me.
Yes, sir.
Well, seeing deeply the interconnectedness of all this, the fact which you pointed out is the fear that is deeply rooted in my psycho, culturally conditioned. But also seeing the fact that to recognize the possibility that it may be possible to free of even that cultural conditioning, to see the fact how out of thinking fear originates, right? And that thinking takes place when I live in psychological time. To see them like a map, somebody puts a map of India on the table and you look at the map, you see all the interconnectedness of cities, towns, right? Like that, to see the map of this is the preparedness. There is no special preparedness. To see comprehensively, holistically, all these interconnectedness, right? The root, the branches, the trunk of fear. To see that is the preparedness. That is what I have felt. And also, I understand what you're pointing out, Dubeyji. It has been one of the most fundamental, difficult aspects of our life. It's very easy to imagine, I have listened to Krishnamurti, I am free of fear. Very easy to say that in word. But it's not, if we are really honest, we will know that it follows us like a shadow. Very subtle. It disappears here and it comes up here, right? It has a very extraordinary, profound and deep impact on our lives. But not to get overwhelmed by that, but still keeping your mind open to watch it, look at it, the intricate connections of the whole structure. That is the preparation. Something may happen. We don't know what that something is. Something may happen out of that. That is what is possible for us, right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Harshji, is your audio okay now? Would you like to unmute and complete your... Please unmute. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Clear.
I've shifted to using my phone instead of, I don't know where I was. I don't know what I was saying.
Your video is much more clear.
Okay, good. So I think I was talking about questions being Zen-like. Was that, did you hear that part?
Yes. One
Okay.
hand clapping, you were mentioning.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was saying that the way to answer questions is like answering the question, can a mountain be climbed? By actually, first you can sit around and discuss it and think of understand what is involved, and you can think of a path that will take you up to the top of the mountain that you might try. But I think his questions are like that. Eventually, the only way to answer a question is to set out to do it, is to say, okay, I will see what it takes. I don't know what it takes. And I have to step into the unknown. I have not even forget what Krishnaji says, because I now have to, all that to some extent is theoretical, because I've only understood it with my intellect. And now I have to live it. So I have to see what it takes to live without images, let's say. And so I think it's important to understand the nature of Krishnamurti's questions, that there are questions that you hold. There are questions that, and as Kandaswamy is saying, you're not defeated. You're not always looking for a result. You're not asking, am I achieving something? Am I getting there? But because essentially, he is asking for a quality of observation. And he is also saying that that observation is enough. That is the only action that is necessary, is to have that quality of awareness, of intelligence, of observation. And that is the key to actually sweeping away fear or sorrow or whatever that people might be, that we can see in the world around us. So I think that's the basic thing that I wanted to add to what you were saying. Yeah. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Verma, please unmute yourself. Mr. Pradeep Verma, please. Yes, go ahead.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yes. So this is in response to Dr. Dubey's question of preparedness. Three things come to my mind. The intensity of inquiry, the passion, intensity, and honesty. If these things are there, working with myself, exploring myself, nothing is impossible. This is what I feel. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, sir.
Ines Wagbare wanted to ask a question.
Yes, Mr. Bagmare, please unmute yourself. Unmute. Yeah. Please unmute yourself, Mr. Bagmare. Yeah.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Sir, my question is, you said that origin of the fear is in thought. I just want to explore it, whether it is really the fear is originating from thought or it's from unknown source, which is telling me that you are inadequate or sufficient, or you are having insecurity, or you are having lack. Because of that, the fear is coming. So fear can, if it is so, if it is coming from unknown source, then can you ever be free from it? You got my point, sir?
Yes, sir. I understand what you're asking.
Thought can
No,
breed
when
it,
you-
but thought can breed it, but thought is not the source of fear, is it, sir?
What do you mean by unknown source means what? What do you mean when you say it's an
My
unknown
whole
source?
system, my whole system is telling me that you are inadequate in this particular situation. Just as you given me the example of the snake. In the case of snake, you automatically respond because your system gives the response immediately. But when the situation is not that critical, at that time you are having choices, and at that time that source gives you the options, and then you react as per your capacity or capability or whatever it is. So is thought really involved in this, or thought is just simply giving a what we can say name to it, or a recording to it, or giving an impression to you, or creating image? That's all.
If you can look at anatomically what takes place, we have the brain and the brain cells, and experiences, incidents get registered as memories in the brain cells. That's a fact, isn't it? When I come across a certain experience, like seeing a snake in the garden, that gets registered as a memory in the brain. And I think the thought goes and dips into this memory, gives life to this memory, and then the fear arises. Till such time this happens, it is just a dead memory. For example, when you are in sleep, it is still there as in your memory. This fear is still in your memory, but it is not active. It's not there. When you wake up, when you start thinking, the movement of thought connecting to that memory brings it as a new energy called fear. Can we see this? But if you ask the question, some other source, one doesn't know. One has to look at this. One sees there is a deep root of this fear within one's psyche, within the consciousness. One acknowledges it. One not casual about it. But as far as one I can observe physically, anatomically, the brain cells, there is a record of that experience, incident as memory in the brain. And if they remain as a memory, that's it. But the thought touching that memory, bringing out, and something new happens, the memory becomes activated with energy in the form of a fear. Till such time that contact with thought takes place, it's there. In the sleep, you don't have any fears, right? You just sleep. It is there in your skull, but it is you sleep. Or when you are anesthesia, you're given, you are knocked out. There's nothing. But when the effect is over, thought begins. You become conscious. The thought starts moving, then brings up all the things one after another, isn't it? So this is what one could observe. Whether it has any further unknown source about which we have no control is something which we have to keep the question alive. I don't know. This is something we see.
In sleep, you don't have awareness. Because you become aware, then only it takes place, fear takes place. In sleep, there is no awareness.
Can I say something about this question?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
please,
yes, yes.
Yes. See, I think we have to see what we mean by fear, right? Now, suppose you, because the question you're asking about thought and fear. Now, suppose you stepping out on the road and you see a car coming at you. So that's what you're seeing. Your senses tell you the car is coming. Now, then something else tells you that there is danger involved, that you might get hurt. And that's probably thought. If you're a kid and you haven't learned this and you haven't had it in memory, either through your own experience or secondhand through other people's experience, if it isn't in your brain that the car could damage me, then you're not going to think about stepping out of the way. So in some way, thought is involved. You've seen something, you registered it, your brain has said this is dangerous, and very quickly has given your legs or the command to get yourself out of there, right? So that's still a kind of action of thought. But I think that when we say that fear and thought are, what we are really saying is that take the same instance. You were very frightened, I'm using the word, by that car, which means that that incident when the car was rushing at you is now recorded in your memory as something that is dangerous. Now you come to another situation where there's a car coming, but it's not really coming at you, but your mind pulls up the memory of that car, of cars, and you become frightened of cars. You're reacting not to the actual situation that is in front of you, but you're reacting to an imagined situation, which is a result of your of what is stored in your brain as a past experience. It can be not just experience. It could be somebody has told you that something could hurt you. So now you have that recorded in your mind. Or people of a certain kind, even color of skin or so on, you heard all kinds of things, you read stories or so on. So now it's the thought that is running your action, not your direct perception of what is going to happen. So I think that is the nature of fear, that your actions arise, which are actions of being hurt or damaged or lack of security or whatever, which is what we call fear. That is when we say we fear something, we mean that it's going to in some way hurt us. It's going to, so when that is coming, not from something real, otherwise, there are a lot of dangerous situations, which of course you should withdraw from. It should affect your actions. But when they are not real, in the sense that they're not immediate, they're just being projected by your brain. And that can become very acute. People who've been in wars, they have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They just recall that, and some little instant will recall that entire thing, and they freeze, they can't do a thing. They are, because they're imagined themselves back in that situation where guns are firing all around them and people are trying to kill them. And they go completely crazy, unable to act. So, it can become very extreme, this way in which the images and memories that are stored will determine our actions instead of what is actually in front of us. I think that is what fear is about. Yeah. But to observe the operation of that, I'm not giving you a theoretical thing, but to see the thought come up, because it's very fast. it happens very quickly. And it should, because in a real situation, it's got to get you out of the situation fast. And our brains are hardwired. And actually, we often don't catch the fear at the source, at the point that it arises. It actually, little later, when it's already established itself in your mind. So once again, what is required here is that observation of the movement of thought and the very moment of the arising of the old thought and beginning to develop into an image, so that you can feel, oh no, this is an old thought. This is not what is happening right now. And that is how observation will prevent the blossoming of the fear in it completely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have Anandji has a question. Anandji, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. I want to ask on unity in diversity. But before that, I thought I have an observation on fear. Like, I see that fear is essential in my survival. Can I see that physically it is required very much for my survival? Without fear, I don't think I will survive. I won't even, I mean, when I come across danger, I won't bother about it. So psychologically, the fear becomes a challenge. I mean, and I can become insane because the fear which is taking place in me, which is psychological. I mean, that is how I would look at it. Like when we say we should end fear, or end images, or end thoughts, it doesn't mean I need to completely end them as such, but I need to understand. I need to understand the role. Images are essential again for my survival. Thought is again essential. Functionally, I mean, it is required. Without that, I would be insane. So when K says that we need to end, literally we seem to be taking it. We take it in literal meaning that I should not have thought. I should not have images. I should not have fear. That is psychological, but functionally it is required. It has got a place. My question was, when I say unity in diversity, now K says, if I call myself a Hindu, the other person calls a Muslim. Now, how can there be unity? This question is for Mr. Kandaswamy, sir.
We have always talked about peaceful coexistence. For centuries, this term has been coined. You may be a Muslim, you may be a Christian, you may be a Hindu, but amongst us there is a common stand. We can all peacefully coexist. But if we really look back over the centuries, what has really happened? Such brutality, such torture, such violence, such great sorrow on account of this division. So we have to naturally ask the question, can we just go by the old answers? And within our consciousness have a mind which is not trying to create a unity out of diversity, but where the diversity itself is not there. Fundamentally, as a seed, I am just a human being. I am not a Hindu. I may be born in India, doesn't mean I am a Hindu. Can I root it out of my psyche? That is, which means, when I ask the question, can I root it out of my psyche? Can I let go of my identity? Can I let go of my sense of security? I seem to imagine that this gives me. These are the underlying questions involved. Because if you see the fact of what's happening now, that the so-called peaceful coexistence is not going to really be there. It's a mirage, endlessly chasing the mirage. That is what the past centuries prove, thousands of years human experience prove. So is there a different way of looking at this? That is the question that arises. Because the earlier assumption hasn't worked, has not led us anywhere. It has brought us a dead end with so much of sorrow and suffering.
Yes, sir. I mean, the question, I raised is, when there's a fragmentation, when there's a division, there has to be conflict. That is what K says. And every other person has said something different, that we must strive, we must unite, we must get together. We don't remain with what is. We always move away from what it should be or what it should be. We never remain with what is. So when I call myself a Hindu, another person calls himself a Muslim, can I say there's a division? There's a fragmentation. So how do I understand that is a question, sir? And also you spoke about relationships, sir. And now life is relationship. Now, how do I understand what life means? What do I understand by relationship, sir? This seems to be very, I mean, quite a challenge, challenging for most of us to understand. How do I understand what life means?
What life
What life
means?
means, and what is relationship? Like you said, life is relationship. How do I,
Yes.
yeah, how do I look at it?
No, as I was born and I live in this world, I could see my life is the whole gamut of the state of consciousness I have, whatever I have gathered within my mind as experiences, memories, views, conclusions, and all the relationships that I seem to have with fellow human beings, whether family or non-family. Life is all this. Now, life is all this, but to ask mystically the question, what is life? Why am I born? I don't know the answers. What is the origin of life? Why am I born? What happens to me after death? These are all realms which I have no answers. I don't know what it means. All I know is the daily morning to evening activity, the relationships I have with so many people, inwardly, outwardly. All that is my life. That is what I understand as life. But to go beyond, ask mystical questions about why am I born? What is the mystery of birth? What is the origin of all this creation, manifestation? I'm not saying they are useless questions. They are profound questions, but I have to hold those questions in my hand without rushing to any answers. I don't know. I have to. The only thing that I have heard has been pointed out to me is lay the foundation. Have a consciousness which is different. Lay the right foundation in life. That's what I would look at it. The questions to this, the answers to these deeper questions may come up or may not come up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have to attend to my homework first. I have to do my homework. That is more important. This is what I felt.
That's the point, sir. When you talk about relationship, you're talking about relationship between us, between human beings. But case
Not
is
only human
relationship
beings, with so many other
with,
things.
with every living thing and every non-living thing.
Yes,
Like with
not merely
with the
human
river,
beings.
with the plant.
Relationship
Yes.
with every life form, with property, with money, with siddhantas, with ideals, with theories. I am related to all this, not merely to human beings. I am related to the whole gamut of things, including human beings, non-human beings, to theories, siddhantas, philosophies, property, money. I have to re-examine the nature of this relationship with everything.
And other beings also, sir. Other sentient beings
Of
too.
course, of course, of course.
Can
So
I say
what
something?
Certainly, yes.
Can I say something at
With
this
all
point?
with all life forms, yes.
So can I say something at this point?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I think this question of questions is a very important one. Why do we ask any of these questions? Any question that we might ask? See, I would suggest that there are some things which I would call real questions. For example, I can sit around talking about relationships, but it can get intellectual. But a point arises when I'm having a difficulty in my relationship, say with my daughter or my son or something. And then the question becomes real. How can I have a relationship in which there is no conflict? That's the point at which that question becomes real, immediate, and has the possibility of my looking at what is actually happening in the relationship to discover what is, or, it could be any number of things. I think most of us come to these deeper, more profound questions. Maybe somebody dies and there's the sense of loss or deep sorrow or something like that that makes us question, then ask, that brings us to bigger questions about life. Or, how do I, I'm a young person trying to make sense of what to do with my life, with all this confusing. So I think an important thing is not to be asked, as I think was kind of what Kandaswamy was saying as well, that we're not asking deep questions for the sake of asking them, but something a lot closer to us, something that makes immediate sense, and then we have the energy to go into the question.
Otherwise, they are abstract questions. They are questions in
Otherwise,
abstract.
they're abstract questions, yes. And they'll be different for different people have different questions, different ways into this. Yeah.
Clemis, your question, then we have two more, Tarun Kumar and George, and then we'll end. Clemis, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to ask Kandaswamy. See, when we say I am free of fear, or anybody says I am free of fear, is this a valid statement? Because can we ever know that we are free of fear? Because Krishnamurti also said that, see, life is from moment to moment. So at this moment, fear may not be there. But how can I be sure that at the next moment, there will be no fear? So when I say I am free of fear or of any other such things, is this a valid statement? That is one question. And the other thing, I just wanted to add something about this situation of religion. My feeling is that every religion, the people in every religion, they feel their religion is the one that is right. The Christians, they think only Christianity is the religion. I don't know about the others, if they have such a strong feeling, but it seems to me that everybody who holds a belief, they hold it for the reasons that they feel that's the right thing to believe in. So what Krishnamurti is pointing out is, look, watch out your beliefs. Don't hold beliefs. And when we think, so when we are studying Krishnamurti, I think that is one of the points that we have to be very much aware, that we don't make him into another belief, that we don't create a new division, like a new kind of sect, like the one who knows everything. So the whole thing, all these people who have seen something, they saw something, but the people, and they don't create division, but the people who come after them and start to listen to what they say because they don't have the same perception, they create the division. So we have to watch out that we are not these people doing that, So that's what I wanted to say.
I have listened to the two parts of your question. One, yes, I understand one can't consciously say I am free of fear, right? Maybe a theoretical statement. What is possible for a human being is to see the whole structure and map of it as much as possible that he can see. And out of the clear seeing, some resolution, some clarity one comes upon, right? And the connections of thought, memory, living in psychological time, the deep root of the fear in one's psyche. One can look at all this, and out of clear seeing, some clarity may come. So one doesn't stand up and say, well, now I am free of fear. I don't think one can make such a conscious statement. I understand what you're saying. The other one is, of course, there is every danger of Krishnamurti being made into another religious division, right? In conflict with our ideologies. And Krishnaji constantly, as you pointed out, cautioned against us. So it's left to each one of us who have been fortunate to contact with these teachings, not to make a theory of it, not to make a philosophy of it, and not to make some ism of it, Krishnamurti-ism of it. So there's every danger, of course, yes. We need to be very alive to this danger. We have to be very careful, not making a theory of it. And that is already happening. I could see people are attempting to make this into another religion, another philosophy, which becomes very crystallized. So one has to guard against all this, which is very true. And the responsibility of guarding against all this is between you and me, all of us.
Mr. Tarun Kumar has a question. Please go ahead.
Sir, what has been seen that fear is inbuilt by birth in human beings as well as in every living being, even before the start of stage of thinking process. Even newly born childs with no memory gets affected of fear many times in a day. It is on the later stage of the life that thoughts of losing the favorable and getting unfavorable is the type of thinking where thoughts generates fear. Even during sleep, many people have experience of fear. So, thoughts generates fear is not completely right sentence as far as these experiences are concerned. And the second part is that further that fear is necessary for maintaining the discipline and common rules in the survival. So I am more interested in the answer of the first question because of the limitations of the time.
Harsh,
Yes.
yeah.
So I see the second bit that you said that interests me, to say that fear is necessary for the survival. I think we have to make a very clear difference over here. What we are calling fear. There is something that you might call reasonable fear. That is, yes, you should be afraid of snakes. But I think the kind of fear, the way in which we are using the word fear is to talk about something which is a little more unreasonable or even irrational fear. And that is the part that actually does not lead to survival. It leads actually against survival. Fears of, say, that Hindus might have Muslims or Muslims might have Hindus will lead to violence, to conflict, and they go against survival. So that is one of the reasons why it's necessary for us, by observation on each different instance, to see how the fear arises from thought, to actually be aware of that process so that we can distinguish between that which is reasonable, that, okay, I'm standing too close to the edge of a cliff, I'd better be careful and act on that, or from those that are unreasonable, that are just a kind of whirlpool in my mind, that is not, there is actually no reason for that fear. So in this first sense, that what I'm calling reasonable fear, yes, that is necessary for survival, but a lot of fear is just inbuilt, ingrown, we're not even aware of it, it's unconscious, and it determines our everyday. It's part of our psyche. It's actually, you may call it psychological fear, but you know, that's what it is. It's something that has gone into our brain and is controlling our actions without our knowing about it.
I just want to add, yeah, it's quite interesting. It's an open question. The fact, the recognition that when I touch the flame, my hand will get burnt. Is it fear or is it a part of insight? I have seen something that happened to my neighbor, and I recognize the logic of it. This is something, if you touch it, will burn you. But the fear arises, oh, the flame is out there, oh, it may come near, or I may go near and fall over it, and I may get killed, or I may get burnt. That is a psychological fear. So in that sense, it's natural. We don't need to argue over realistic natural fears like a snake or a fire or ocean, getting drowned in an ocean. You don't venture into the ocean just like that without knowing the depth, right? You don't make a issue out of that. But to use the thinking process, the mind, to have an imaginary things when the facts are different, that could be within the realm of fear. I don't know. But to touch the flame, it will burn you. Is it fear or is an insight we have gathered? Because we have seen this earlier and that's clear. You have clearly seen it. This is what happens. It's logical. When 2 + 2 is equal to 4, it's logical. I don't know. I am just asking the question. I don't know answers.
Well, just to complicate this situation of touching of something that is hot, you know that what happens physiologically is that the sensory nerves send a signal and it doesn't even get to the brain. In the spinal cord, it connects directly with the motor nerves and it jerks your hand back it hasn't even reached the level of consciousness or unconsciousness. It hasn't even reached the brain. So your body has automatic mechanisms like that, which will bring it back. And actually, it's important even to have observation of that, because there will be situations where you touch something hot and you jerk yourself back and you fall over a cliff, say, or because that is so. Even to have that deep an awareness for these unconscious reactions, that's what they are. They're reactions, unconscious reaction. So, and I think it's the function of intelligence to be able to tell which of these, whether in that situation, is suitable and correct, and which are just unnecessary things from the past.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take the last question now. George, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. Actually, as Mr. Kandaswamy just finished, the K has pointed out that when you touch the flame, you get burnt. And when you see the thing again, what tells you that you don't touch the thing is, K calls it as an intelligence. He doesn't say that it is thought reminds you. It's the intelligence that says, if you touch the flame, you get burnt. That is one thing I wanted to tell. Another thing is about relationship, the question posed. Krishnamurti basically questions, are we related either to a thing or to a person or to a property, or are we related to the image of the thing which we have about that? Either it be a person or a thing or an idea. So in that case, we are related only to the image which we have about that. So there is no real relationship between whatever we think we are related to. That is one thing. And another thing which I wanted to say about thought is, actually at one level, thought may be the culprit. But the basic thing is, we think one thing, that is normal for everyone. But what we think is right, we hold on to that. I think that is the most culprit thing. This just I wanted to add. That's all. It's not a question. It's a comment.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
Sushilji, should we close now?
Yes, it's 12:50.
Unmute yourself.
For an hour and I will close.
Yeah.
1 hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah. So you can close, sir. Thank you so much for very interesting.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dubey sir.
Thank you.
All the best.
Kamlesh, you can close now, please.